and listen to if you haven't already. It's all about how healthcare in America has been fucked up by the media and politics, and it is smart and funny, and I will be talking to him all about it. Before that, we got a lot of. Sorry. Before that, we got to talk about all the latest developments on impeachment, including Trump's epic meltdown on Wednesday, more self incrimination today, Thursday, and we'll also share the results of our brand new polar coaster survey with Change Research in the battleground state of Arizona. Finally, if you haven't, check out the newest episode of Pod Save the World, where Ben and Tommy look at Trump's impeachable phone call from a foreign policy angle, including how it could destabilize the Ukrainian government, how Russia uses corruption to control Ukrainian politics, and how the policies advanced by Biden were initially shaped. They also talk with former British Prime Minister David Cameron about Brexit, Boris Johnson, and the time that Ben Rhodes offended the Queen of England. So check it out.
The Pod Save the World teases are getting quite good.
I know. Tommy really put some time into those, Tommy and Michael. Okay, let's get to the news. Public support for impeachment has been rising, and we now have our own polling to confirm that. We'll talk more about all the results from our latest polar coaster series with Change Research in a bit. But we did ask about impeachment and found that 49% of Arizona voters support impeachment, including nearly 94% of Democrats and about half of independents. More than 90% of voters say they've heard about the Ukraine scandal, and what they learned has made independents and swing voters we're defining as people who have voted for at least one Republican and Democrat in the last 3 years. Independents and swing voters are 20 to 30% less likely to support Trump, who've heard about the Ukraine scandal. We also tested a few different Democratic messages on impeachment against Trump's message that Democrats are engaged in a witch hunt because they're mad about 2016. And the most effective Democratic message is that Congress needs to hold Trump accountable for his abuse of power to ensure a free and fair election in 2020, even if it means impeachment. After hearing this, voters said they were more likely to support the Democratic candidate over the Republican candidate's message by 51 to 43%. Dan, how should this kind of data and some of the other polling we've seen inform Democratic strategy on impeachment?
Well, I think it is important to see polling in a battleground state, which Arizona clearly is, as our poll makes clear. In this very polarized nation we have, national polls are where Trump is incredibly popular in some states and incredibly unpopular in other bluer states, don't really give us as much of a signal of what's happening in the states that are going to decide the presidential election. And the fact that impeachment is a winnable exercise here in Arizona, a state that will help decide the presidency and who controls the Senate, should put steel in the spine of the Democrats who are doing this. If you can litigate this political case in Arizona, you can do it anywhere in the country, and that is, I think, that should give comfort to some of the members who are more nervous about the politics of this than they should be.
Yeah, and look, I mean, one thing we've seen from the polling throughout the last week is that this is not at least so far, this is not some scary political loser that a lot of Democratic strategists in D.C. thought it was at first. Democrats, like, almost unanimously now support impeachment across polls. It's like, between 85 and 95% are supportive of this. There was a few stories today, too, that I saw some of the representatives from more conservative districts, like Max Rose, some other people, it's stories about them going back to their districts, and, they've been holding town halls, and actually a lot of their voters were pretty supportive of what they're doing. There's even there's one story about Alyssa Slotkin, who is representative in Michigan, also a district that she flipped from a Republican, so it's a pretty moderate, pretty conservative district. And, they interviewed a couple, basically Trump supporters who got all their news from, like, OAN, and Fox and everything, and who love Trump and think that impeachment's a waste of time. And then the reporter's like, well, what about Alyssa Slotkin, your representative, who is now supportive of impeachment? They're like, oh, we love her. We love her. That's okay that she supports impeachment. We don't agree, but we still love her. So far it's shown that there's not as much risk as people thought for Democrats. I do think the other thing that was interesting is, we tested two messages on impeachment, and the first one was more straightforward. Donald Trump deserves to be impeached for, and then we sort of listed out some of the impeachable offenses. And then we did a second one that was like, look, here's what official White House documents show. And we talk about the call summary, and then we say, in order to defend our democracy and, hold the president accountable and make sure there's free and fair elections, Congress has to investigate that, even if it means impeachment. So it was a little more couched, a little more cautious, a little more sort of like framing it as this more sad bipartisan thing that we have to do. And it was much more popular, much more persuasive among voters. Not very surprising, but it does tell you why sort of Pelosi and a lot of the other Democrats are framing impeachment as they are, like, and not making it quite so partisan.
So celebratory?
It's right. Yeah, it's not a celebratory time. It's more in sadness than anger, Dan.
Yes. One other thing in the poll that I thought was very notable for Democrats in this, which is we asked people how much they had heard about Trump's phone call with Ukraine, and the numbers were stunning. 66% of respondents said they had heard a lot, and another 25% said they'd heard a decent amount about this. So in this distracted, disaggregated media environment where it's hard to break through, this story is breaking through. You have 9 in 10 voters hearing a lot or a decent amount about this story in the last week. And as you mentioned in the polling, the information in that story is very politically damaging to Trump. Yep. And so, that is an argument both for standing strong here and continuing to push forward. And it's also an argument against short-circuiting this process early because you want to get it over with.
It's also an argument for Democrats, making sure that they drive this message every single day, that they, that they're speaking to the public, that they're holding press conferences, that they're holding hearings, because so far the news has done the Democrats' work for them, right? By breaking the story, and there's new things for people to hear all the time. At some point, when all the facts are known, there's going to have to be an effort on behalf of Democratic leaders to keep this in the news. Impeachment hearings would obviously do that, but there is a danger here where if everyone just goes about their business and forgets this ever happened, it will fade from the news and it will fade from people's memories. Yeah. So one person who's not acting like impeachment will be a political winner for Donald Trump is Donald Trump. All of his couple weeks of angry tweeting came to life on Wednesday during a rolling day-long meltdown alongside the president of Finland yesterday. First in the Oval Office, then at a press conference. It was all more of the same. Accused the media of being corrupt, accused Congress of staging a coup, call for Congressman Schiff to be tried for treason. It's just typical Wednesday. Trump talked about how impeachment and the Ukraine scandal is all a hoax, that he did nothing wrong, that his phone call was perfect. And then this morning, Thursday morning, he confessed to everything he's being accused of he confessed to everything he's being accused of by publicly calling on Ukraine and now China to investigate Joe Biden and his family. Let's listen to some highlights. Drop in it later. Okay, so we'll hear the highlights, blah, blah, blah. Dan, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? He did it. He tells us he did it. What else do we need?
Well, look, I see this angry, red-faced man screaming into the void, and I say, that is a man who looks like he just lured Democrats into his impeachment trap. I mean, it is amazing that basically the equivalent of what he did today is Nixon going to the South Lawn, admitting that he directed the break-in to the Watergate, and then suggesting he's going to do another break-in to another Democratic Party headquarters later. It is truly mind-boggling in its audacity, stupidity, the audacity of dumb. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. He's spent the last 7 days trying to argue that he did not pressure Ukraine to do this, and then this is I will say the question that was asked today is the same question that Jeff Mason from Reuters asked Trump yesterday, which was a very smart question.
Yes.
Which is, they asked, what specifically did you want Zelensky to do with regard to Biden? And I think most questions that reporters ask of Trump too often are treating Trump as a cable news pundit and not president. This is a very specific one where the answer is, if he tells the truth, he is admitting to the crime.
Right.
And he got so mad about it yesterday that he screamed at Jeff Mason as, like, it's hard to imagine outside of the context of an angry football coach, one adult screaming at another adult like that in public.
Yeah, we actually have a clip of that too. Let's just play that really quick. Okay, go for it. So that was Donald Trump screaming at a reporter. Ask the president of Finland a question. That was my favorite line in that is, hey, we got the president of Finland here. Ask him a question.
I mean, Donald Trump's deep and abiding respect for the protocol of the 2-2 foreign leader press conference is admirable, I guess.
I also just think, like, look, we have now spent the last couple days with Donald Trump and the entire, like, Republicans in Congress, MAGA pundits, Fox News, the whole fucking conservative swamp ecosystem, coming up with all of these bullshit defenses about, who is the whistleblower, and this is secondhand information, and he worked with Adam Schiff, and Adam Schiff should resign. Adam Schiff made up the phone call. The whistleblower made up the phone call. None of this is real. And then all of us hear Donald Trump call on foreign powers to investigate his political opponents, like, in public this morning. It's like, I guess, are we all the whistleblowers now? Hello, Inspector General. I have some secondhand information. I have heard from very good sources Donald Trump's voice asking foreign governments to investigate his political opponents. Should I write up the complaint? Should I go to Adam Schiff? What should I do with this information, Dan?
I think there is a broader issue here about the Trump presidency that sort of manifests itself in the last week, which is, whether it's in his Twitter tantrums, which we talked about on tour last week, or, what he said in his various press temper tantrums yesterday.
Yeah.
But I mean, here you have the president of the United States calling for the arrest, sentencing, and execution of Democratic members of Congress and whistleblowers. You have the president bullying a whistleblower, comparing a whistleblower to a spy, accusing them of treason. You have the president calling a constitutional impeachment process a coup to take away people's Second Amendment rights, which seems not dangerous at all.
Yeah.
And we have reached this point where sort of the majority of the political community, the reporters, politicians, blue checkmark nation, we now no longer take the president seriously or literally.
Yeah.
He's basically the person, screaming on the subway, and you're more focused on the fact that they're screaming than what they're screaming. But he's president of the United States, and these things still matter, and they really matter. Like, we shouldn't take it lightly when the president calls for the investigation of political opponents or members of Congress, when the chief law enforcement officer in the entire country is a named member of the alleged criminal conspiracy at the root of this whole thing. And so, like, we laugh about it. He is insane. It is ridiculous. It is a fucking national and global embarrassment that he is president of the United States. But we can't default to he's a crazy person, therefore the things he say don't matter, because as we know from all the violent threats that happened, or all the violence that happened in El Paso or the pipe bombs, that the things he say do matter. And there are people in this world who act on them, even if they're not members of Congress.
There's that. And there's also the fact that he is, because this scandal and these impeachable offenses have to do with national security and foreign policy, like it opens up a whole new element to why this is dangerous. Like, the president is jeopardizing our national security because he is basing our foreign policy on his own narrow political interests, right? Like, Ukraine is a country that was invaded by Russia, that the global community and the United States of America have decided that it is in our interest to help defend them from Russian aggression. And now that is at risk because Donald Trump wanted them to investigate his political opponent. China, an authoritarian government with whom we're in a trade war because of Donald Trump, with the entire global economy and the United States economy at stake, Now he's sending them a message that this authoritarian government should investigate an American citizen and their family who happens to be a potential political opponent of Donald Trump. That's what he's doing right now. It's not just like, I mean, it can, I've laughed at times during this whole thing. It is absurd watching this unfold. But we are, the fact that our foreign policy is at stake and our foreign policy is being based on whatever Donald Trump thinks will get him through the election is incredibly dangerous. Incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. These are not great times, I would say.
No, they're not. It's not great, Dan. Politico reports that
buy those tumblers.
Buy those tumblers. Yeah, no, that's it. It's on sale now. But Politico reports that some Republican lawmakers and strategists are concerned about Trump's strategy with
I couldn't get through the question. Sorry.
with one Republican operative saying, quote, "Nobody wants to look like Kevin McCarthy did on 60 Minutes, and right now there is deep skepticism that the late-night Fox lineup will have any credibility with rank-and-file Republicans that are necessary to prosecute this argument against House Democrats." What do you think about that?
I mean, it is certainly true that, I reject the premise of the question in the sense that there's obviously no White House strategy.
Right.
Right. They don't, there isn't one. There is just a man ranting into a microphone and then various sycophants with 2 to 3 million people audiences parroting those. I was struck by this tweet from, I think it was a tweet from Laura Ingraham that said, basically she was trying to give Trump advice where if he essentially ignored this and treated it and stopped acting like a crazy person, that he would get through it better. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to watch because there is a strategy here. It's pretty obvious that any normal human being could take. And there's also a for Trump, right? Like you could say, I did nothing wrong. You could blame Rudy Giuliani and fire him. You could say you're going to cooperate, right?
Right.
That's sort of what they did with Mueller is they kept saying they were going to cooperate, and they cooperated on the things that didn't matter that much. And on the things that really mattered, they obstructed, and they got away with it, obviously. There is a strategy for Republicans, too, which is to say, we don't agree with what Trump did. We think it was wrong, but we don't think it rises to the level of an impeachable offense. And we think it is a shame that House Democrats are so busy trying to undo the results of the 2016 election that they're refusing to help raise wages for families or improve healthcare. There's an obvious strategy here, but they can't do it because with Trump, you have to take a loyalty oath for political death, right? Like you have to ride with him the whole way, or you live in fear of being one tweet away from a primary.
Yeah, it's ride or die. There is a strategy if you sort of like step really far back and squint, you can sort of see the strategy, which is, the call was perfect. The whistleblower is a partisan liar. Adam Schiff is a partisan liar. They're all in cahoots with the deep state and CNN and, whoever forged Obama's birth certificate. So they have this sort of this conspiracy brewing. And, you saw it yesterday a little bit when the New York Times has the story about how the whistleblower who originally filed a complaint within the intelligence community before going to the IG just with the whistleblower's bosses wasn't getting anywhere, didn't know what to do because they were obviously trying to cover up the complaint. So then the whistleblower goes to Adam Schiff's committee, to one of his staff members, and says, "Hey, I have this complaint. What do I do?" And sort of doesn't explain exactly what the complaint is, but just gives the outline. And then the committee says, okay, well, you should get a lawyer and you should go to your inspector general at the intelligence community. That's the official channel. But because the New York Times writes it, as like Schiff might have known early about the whistleblower, suddenly now every single right-wing media figure is on high alert. Donald Trump's waving the article around during the press conference. I'm exonerated. See what I told you? Adam Schiff's a liar. He's in on this. And I do think what the right is doing is they're just sort of waiting for these little developments to then cling to point to and say, actually, this whole thing was a fucking deep state plot after all, and Donald Trump's innocent. But what is the problem with that here?
Well, there is a fundamental problem, and this entire strategy speaks to the weakness, which is Nothing the whistleblower did or said, who they spoke to, who they voted for. They could have a feel the burn license plate on their car and it wouldn't fucking matter, because we don't need the whistleblower is inconsequential now, because the core piece of evidence prior to Donald Trump admitting to the crime on national television earlier today was a call transcript released by Donald Trump's White House.
Right.
The whistleblower basically drew a crime map, and then we've discovered all the crimes since then. So it doesn't matter. And so, like, that strategy doesn't hold up to literally 1 millisecond of scrutiny.
Yeah.
It may be enough to get through primetime on Fox and to keep 40%, Trump's 40% base in his corner, but it's not a long-term strategy to deal with the political fallout of this.
Yeah, I mean, no person who just sort of even if you're a headline scanner, even if you're just walking through the airport and see chyrons on CNN, you're gonna figure out that this is all bullshit. That the like you said, the whistleblower does not matter anymore, because the call transcript is the impeachable offense. As you said, it was the impeachable offense, the main impeachable offense, until then the president went on TV and called on Ukraine and another nation to investigate his political opponents. Look, it is, and this is why we need to impeach him, and this is why fucking Republicans should join in too. Like, it is clear now that we cannot have a free and fair election in 2020, because the president of the United States is using the vast powers of his office, including his ability to make foreign policy and make national security decisions, to pressure foreign governments to solicit foreign assistance to interfere in our election on his behalf. Literally what the founders were worried about, foreign interference in the United States affairs, in our elections. Donald Trump is committed to doing that. Even now, even as he has been caught and in the middle of an impeachment trial for this, impeachment inquiry about this, he is asking foreign nations to investigate his political opponents. And if people think that he's going to stop at Joe Biden, you should think again, because he will do this. He will find a foreign nation to investigate Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, and on and on and on. And it won't just be foreign nations. It will be, right-wing billionaires, and no matter, he will do anything. He will use all of the powers of his office, including the investigative powers of the United States Attorney General and the Justice Department. Whatever he can get his hands on, he will use it to dirty up his political opponent in 2020. And that is why impeachment is so important.
Let me ask you this question, though.
Yeah.
Do you think impeachment will stop him from doing it again?
Perhaps not. Perhaps not. Basically, all it is, it will sort of be a flashing red light for everyone, because it'll be in the news. So that it's like, everyone be aware that the next time you hear something shady about one of Trump's opponents, now you know that he probably called on someone to find that smear, find that dirt, right? Like, it at least, all it does is it exposes Trump's motives, methods, and sort of shines a light on what he's doing to try to dirty up his political opponents. So in some way, and look, and it might not stop Trump, but there's probably enough people and enough foreign governments who will, if he's being impeached for this, will maybe think twice about it. I don't know. That's the hope. It's basically the only option we have, because the other option is everyone go about their business and Trump just solicits foreign interference in quiet and we don't talk about it.
Yeah, like, I obviously am for impeachment. I think it's the right thing to do, full stop. It's also the best political move in the situation we're currently in. I think I think it almost certainly doesn't decrease the odds that Trump commits more crimes, and potentially increases the odds that he commits more crimes, because nothing happened to him other than being a historical political embarrassment now, and have to wearing the scarlet eye for the rest of time.
Yeah.
But he still is in office. So I do think it will encourage other people to come forward who are witnesses to these crimes.
That's right.
And I do think it will make the people around Trump, not like the most MAGA-y of his people, but the people who run the government, right, to be more cautious about getting sucked into his vortex of crime.
I think that's right.
So when you get the order from Mick Mulvaney or someone else to put the call transcript on the classified server, you're going to be less willing to do that, or more willing to tell someone you got asked to do that. So I think that is we're looking at like actual substantive benefits of going through this process, I think that is one of them. Because for the people who were either willing or were witting or unwitting accomplices to Trump's crimes here, they're all going to spend time in front of Congress. They're going to have to deal with legal bills, and people are not going to want that.
And again, if the ultimate substantive goal is to get him out of office, at least in 2020, because of the election, this will keep him mired in scandal and on the defensive and melting down as he did yesterday. And that's not good for him politically, right? Like his poll numbers are down. The support for impeachment is up. Like this is not every day that he's having a complete meltdown is another day that he and his campaign don't get to prosecute the case against the Democrats, right?
And we'll talk about this a little more when we get to the Arizona poll, but we tested a number of message frames on Trump to try to figure out what the best story to tell about this man is, and one of them was about his constant tweeting and the petty fights and the chaos that comes from a Trump presidency. And that message was very effective with core sets of voters. And so Trump is doing himself, we talked earlier about how the country is dialed into this story. So you have a story that everyone's focused on, people are paying attention, and Trump is exhibiting at a record level the exact behavior that turns a lot of voters off.
That's right.
And so by keeping Trump at an 11 is good for the Democrats over the long term.
So let's talk about the latest substantive developments from this week. First, the latest on the scandal, and then what Congress is doing about it. We learned on Monday that Donald Trump has effectively sent William Barr on an international mission to solicit foreign assistance in discrediting Robert Mueller's investigation and confirming the right-wing conspiracy theory that it was actually Ukraine and the Democrats who colluded and interfered in the 2016 election. Seriously, it's a real thing. As part of that effort, Trump has reportedly called the Australian Prime Minister. He called Boris Johnson. Barr's met with the Italians. Dan, how are these calls for foreign assistance different than the Ukraine call?
Well, the Ukraine call is an off-the-books effort to use law enforcement to politicize an election and to interfere in an election. And the calls with Australia involving Bill Barr is an on-the-books effort to use foreign interference to interfere with an American election, right? This is a sanctioned investigation that is happening, but it has the same goal, right? Which is to strengthen Trump politically by creating some sort of fig leaf to say that he is not actually guilty of obstruction of justice or wanting to collude with the Russians. And so, and we should be all very clear, all of us are paying for this. Every taxpayer in America is paying for Bill Barr to fly around the country to try to make the things that come out of Sean Hannity's mouth true. That is an official mission of the chief law enforcement officer in the country.
Yeah, and it's not just like looking into the past here either, right? Like I think what they're going for here is, and you hear this from all the biggest MAGA pundits out there, like fucking Hugh Hewitt and all the right-wing lunatics, they are all very excited. They keep talking about the Barr report like it's the Mueller report. And, it's yet again, it's another Devin Nunes memo. It's another Barr summary of the Mueller report. Like what they're hoping is for Bill Barr to come out with this explosive new report that says, yes, the American intelligence community did go after Donald Trump in 2016. FBI did go after Donald Trump in 2016. The origins of the investigation were funded by the Democrats, like all of our crazy conspiracy theories have said for a while. And by the way, we don't know that Barr and the Justice Department won't bring more indictments against people that are politically motivated. Like we can't trust that anymore because of what Barr's done. I mean, what is the significance of Barr's involvement here, personal involvement? Like, isn't it a little unusual for the Attorney General of the United States to be personally investigating American intelligence agencies at the president's request?
Yes. I mean, that's a question that answers itself. Like, yes, it's fucking unusual. It is like there was this view among the sort of establishment legal community in Washington who've, were on Bill Barr's moot court team or went to Choate or like the sort of elite law school community in DC, which cares more about each other than their party affiliations. There was sort of this view that, oh, Bill Barr is just doing this to shut Trump up, right? Like, it's sort of a fake thing. We're just going to do it. I've assigned this attorney general to do it, I've assigned this U.S. attorney to do it, and it's just going to be happening, and we're just going to calm the president down. But that's not what's happening. Bill Barr is himself flying around the country. Let's just put it this way. It is so unusual. If Bill Barr himself was flying around the United States to investigate a major, crime here in the United States, that would be an odd use of his time. So this is for a massive ongoing criminal investigation in the United States. That would be that would be odd. And the fact that he's traveling all over the world and taking all the time, when is he doing his job?
Right. Yeah. No, he's not doing his job. He is a.
This is what he sees as his job, right? He is serving Trump, not the country.
No, he's a full-time henchman and co-conspirator. But the Attorney General is just one of Trump's co-conspirators in the cabinet. The other, turns out, is Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who confirmed on Wednesday that he was on Donald Trump's call with President Zelensky after basically lying about it on the Sunday shows. Dan, if the call was so perfect, why did Pompeo lie about it?
Great question, John. Really great question. I mean, and why did he lie so poorly? I mean, Ben and Tommy have made this point. I think it is highly unusual for the Secretary of State to be on the phone when the president is having a foreign leader call. This is just a conversation with the new president of Ukraine. This is not the first call ever with the head of Iran, or this is not a conversation with Kim Jong-un. This is a normal, theoretically in the course of business call. So it's very strange for Pompeo to be on it. It is very notable that he lied about it. I mean, there is an irony to this, which is Pompeo made it his life mission over several years to make Susan Rice saying an incorrect thing on a Sunday show to be one of the greatest crimes in human history. And he goes on a Sunday show and doesn't say an incorrect thing. He lies to the American people about it, which says to me, at least, that Pompeo knew what he heard was bad.
Yeah.
Because if he said he was on the call, then he'd have to say what he heard on the call. And so it's not a good piece of evidence for the Trump case.
Yeah, I think what's important to know about Pompeo is just how political he is. And, there was a good Vox piece about how all these State Department officials are on record or went on background saying, he has politicized this department to such an incredible degree. There was the profile of him a couple of weeks ago where one diplomat called him a heat-seeking missile for Trump's ass. like he's the big, Trump himself said, I think I fought with everyone on my staff and in the cabinet except Pompeo. He's the only one I haven't fought with. So Pompeo is really sort of in competition with Barr here to see who can curry favor with Trump the most. But it makes you, look, if this whole idea where Rudy Giuliani is basically saying, I just didn't do this myself. I did this with the help of the State Department, right? Like Rudy's trying to implicate the State Department. And, you think knowing how Pompeo's relationship with Trump, that Rudy might be right? And as they continue, and this is why Pompeo is trying to prevent officials from the State Department from testifying to Congress. He doesn't want anyone to testify about this, probably because he knows the State Department is implicated in Trump trying to pressure Ukraine to investigate the Bidens, right? I mean, Trump and Pompeo allowed our ambassador to Ukraine, a career civil servant, longtime official, to be fired for no reason, no cause, only because she wouldn't participate in this fucking scandal to pressure the Ukrainian government to dig up dirt on Biden. And Pompeo did nothing about that. Nothing about that. And all of this is going to come out when these people eventually testify, right?
And in the documents, right? You can tell this in, how Kurt Volker, who was the assistant secretary, and others have reacted to this, which is what was happening was highly unusual and made people very uncomfortable. So to what extent is there email traffic about this among State Department employees? I would not be surprised to find some of these people who got roped into this crime caper writing a note to, sending an email to file, essentially, to sort of detail what happened in real time, much like Jim Comey did in some of his conversations with Trump. And this is one of the reasons Pompeo's ability to prevent those documents from coming out is much more limited than the White House is because State Department documents are subject to FOIA. And so the legal case for getting them, even outside of the context of impeachment inquiry, is much stronger. And so their goal is clearly delay, and try to keep this information out, because there were people there is a story to tell here, because Giuliani, we assume the okay of Mike Pompeo, turned elements of the State Department into a taxpayer-funded part of the Trump for re-election campaign. And that's multiple
bad.
crimes. Yeah, that is not legal.
So let's talk about what the House Democrats are doing about all this. They've now subpoenaed Rudy, multiple State Department officials, and the White House itself for documents and depositions. Pompeo responded with a letter that basically told Democrats to fuck off, though he didn't explicitly say he wouldn't be cooperating. It was a lot of words about, I don't want to subject my employees to the bullying and intimidation of Congress and blah, blah, blah. Rudy sounds like he might tell them to fuck off. His excuse was, well, no, it was signed by Democrats, so I don't have to comply with a subpoena signed by Democrats.
That's not a thing.
That's not a thing, no. Who knows what the White House will do? Can Trump and his goons just ignore these subpoenas, and what can Democrats do about that?
I mean, there will be a court case about this if they ignore it. And we will put our hands in the judiciary. Now, the ability of a judge to side with Trump and the Trump administration is much harder in the context of impeachment inquiry. There is an urgency to this request that is both in terms of time and value of the request that is much bigger. And so it seems unlikely that they are going to be able to stop everything. There will be conversations about executive privilege as it relates to, certainly these calls, the other calls that are on the highly classified server, things like that. Maybe there will be a debate about, but in general, it seems like the Trump administration is going to have to cooperate at some level, or they will be forced to cooperate. And I do think that the Pompeo letter is essentially performative obstruction.
Yeah.
Right. He said he's writing the letter so that he can show Trump and Trump's goons that he is goon-like, even though there's a lot of there's a lot of bite to the bark in the letter.
I do think that Schiff and Pelosi and the Democrats have been smart in that in these letters that they send, in these subpoenas, they say, by the way, if you do not comply, it will be used as evidence against you in the impeachment trial. And that we will consider obstruction of... remember, one of the articles of impeachment for Nixon was obstruction of Congress. And, Schiff and Pelosi are basically saying, anyone who doesn't comply, this will be part of an article of impeachment that is obstruction of Congress. Now, I wonder if the Trump administration isn't looking at that and saying, well, you know what? If we're either going to be... If the president's going to be impeached for either a bunch of crimes and abuses of power that the whole public knows about, or be impeached for us obstructing Congress because we don't want to provide any information or have anything else be revealed, they don't just take the path of being impeached for obstruction of Congress because they know that essentially this is all, this is a political exercise, as impeachment always is. Impeachment is a political exercise. And they just think it will be less damaging to them in the election if they're impeached over obstruction of Congress versus if a whole bunch of new information comes out.
Yeah, I really much worry about that, because it's essentially like adding a fourth life sentence to someone's term. Like, why do they care, right?
Right.
And I think so I hope that Democrats don't default to that in the interest of handling this expeditiously.
Yes. Because
I think we do want to get to the bottom of this. We want to know
we want the
truth. We want the truth. We want to know the full scope of what happened. And we also just think of all the things we've learned within a week. And this is only from things that Trump has either admitted publicly or the White House has released. Imagine what we can find out when we actually get the things that they think we shouldn't have.
Right.
And so there will be a balance. And I understand there's a balance here. Like, we can't live in a world where the House has to wait for this to wind itself through a bunch of courts, the Supreme Court sits on it, and we're into like the fall of next year. Like that is not a viable option. But I hope we push it. I hope they push as hard as they can to get as much truth as they possibly can, and don't allow some sort of November deadline or December deadline to allow Trump to deny the American people the fullest picture possible of what Trump did.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's talk about 2020 and start with the results of our latest Polar Coaster 2020 series with our wonderful partners at Change Research. Just a note about Change. Change's weekly polling was one of the very first to spot Elizabeth Warren's rise in the primary. They can do polling very quickly with dynamic online sampling. And so if you're a Democratic candidate, committee, nonprofit, think about using them. Go to changeresearch.com. Check out all of their data. They did a great impeachment poll within like 48 hours last week. So you can check out all the results there. All right, so we polled Arizona. Dan, why did we poll Arizona, and what were we looking to achieve in this poll?
Well, two things. We polled Arizona because Arizona has been talked about for years as a battleground state. This is hard to. Arizona's been talked about for years as a battleground state. Even 2008, Obama even considered investing in there at the end. In 2016, the Clinton campaign campaigned in Arizona in the last week and spent money there. A decision that hasn't worn well over time. But there's been this thought that Arizona is on the cusp of becoming a true battleground state like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Virginia, et cetera. And our poll indicates that it is.
Yes.
So we wanted to test that. We wanted to see how real a battleground state it was. Is it sort of more like Wisconsin than Georgia, right? Is it close enough that it deserves early and serious investment? And the other question is, we've done one other battleground state, and that is Wisconsin, and there has been this debate raging for a while now within the Democratic Party of, do we want to focus on the quote unquote Rust Belt in the industrial Midwest or the Sun Belt, states like Arizona? And our poll indicates that that's a false choice, that there's very little difference in the efficacy of the messaging between those two states. You don't have to have a message for Arizona, a message for Wisconsin. The same message could be very effective in both places. You just have to have the right message.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point. All right, to the findings. Trump's approval in Arizona is the same as it was in Wisconsin, 48%, which is higher than his national average of around 41%. He's got a 50-48 approval on the economy, which was also the same as Wisconsin. And he trails a generic Democratic candidate 47% to 46%, with 2% voting third party and 5% undecided. That's also, it was a 1-point margin in Wisconsin as well. This is a state where new voters are key for Democrats. Non-2016 voters, people who did not vote in 2016 but say they're going to vote in 2020, lean Democrat by 69 to 16%. And this is why, in this poll, Arizona is much closer than it was in 2016, where Trump beat Hillary by 3.5 points. And also, 68% of those new voters are under 35. So there's the one difference between some of these Sun Belt states and some of these Rust Belt states is in Wisconsin, it is a bit more of a persuasion game. And it does seem like in Arizona, it's much, and we've seen this in Texas and Georgia as well, it's much more about Democrats trying to expand the electorate to bring in new voters and especially young voters. Swing voters, people who say they voted for at least one Republican and one Democrat in the last 3 years, support the Democratic candidate by 54 to 26%. Independents lean Democrat by 43 to 40%. Also, we pulled the Senate race and found that Mark Kelly has a 50 to 47% lead over Senator Martha McSally, whose approval rating is a pretty awful 30%, with 50% disapproval. Dan, I'll stop there before we get into the messaging stuff. Your initial reactions to the top lines, and how do you see the state being different than Wisconsin for Democrats, if at all?
The initial reaction to top lines is Arizona is going to be one of the states that decides the White House. This is not a stretch state. Like, we generally divide, like in the context of a presidential campaign, usually divide the states into battleground states and quote expansion states, which are states that you don't necessarily need to get to 270. They are harder to win, but if all things are going your way and you have resources, you'll invest in them, right? North Carolina is an expansion state. Georgia is theoretically an expansion state, but Wisconsin deserves to be on the battleground state list with the states that are essentially coin flips right now, at this stage at least. And so I think that is a very positive sign for Democrats, because Trump's ability to move Ohio and Iowa into his column have dramatically narrowed the number of paths a Democrat has to 270.
Yeah.
And so getting one more state that we have a chance to win is very helpful, right? You could lose Wisconsin, win Arizona, you're still president, and also forces Trump to compete in another state. So I think that's very important. I think it is very similar to Wisconsin in a lot of ways, but the way in which it is different, you point out, is it is the path to winning is different and I think somewhat harder or more resource intensive than Wisconsin. Because Democrats have not been running well-funded, well-organized presidential campaigns in the state for decades now, you're starting off with a less, your volunteer list, your voter list, your data is less sophisticated and well organized than it is in some of these other states. And it just simply is harder and more expensive to get new voters than it is to persuade people who vote all the time. There's greater upside to it, which is why you want to do it. So to compete in to compete in Arizona is going to require the Democratic Party and eventually the Democratic nominee to start investing as soon as possible, because there's a big registration task and the turnout task is going to be harder. But it is very winnable. And the upside is actually, because of this new voter universe, higher than in Wisconsin.
Yeah. We also polled the Democratic horse race, which we don't put a ton of stock into because Arizona is not an early state. And we tell all you guys to make sure to only really care about polling in the early states. So you can look at our Democratic horse race polling. But the one, and Warren leads, it's 35 with 35, Bernie's at 19, Biden's at 15, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think the one thing it's worth paying attention to is the favorability ratings among all of the candidates. So we talked about Trump's approval. Trump's personal favorability rating among all voters is 42.56, so negative 14 approval, which is pretty bad. But the only Democratic candidates currently more popular than him are Pete Buttigieg, 39.35. He's at +3, but that's, of course, 39.35. That's a lot of people who have no opinion of Pete at all. Elizabeth Warren, who's 45.45, so she's at that's her approval. Bernie Sanders is 41.50 at -9. Kamala Harris is 35.48, -13. And then I was mostly surprised by Joe Biden's favorability in this poll is one of the lowest, 33.56. That's -23. That's worse than Trump's approval. What do you make of that?
I think that this is one data point, so I think we need to be very cautious about drawing too many conclusions from it. Much like this poll was conducted, which is, I think, a caveat we probably should have made. This poll was conducted basically in the worst week of Trump's political life to date.
Yeah, it was last week.
And it's notable that he's still at 48 in this poll in terms of his approval. This has also not been a great week for Joe Biden because every conversation about Trump's impeachment involves a conversation about Joe Biden. Now, that conversation is based on nothing of substance because there was no evidence Joe Biden did anything wrong. But it's still he's in the noise, right, of the story that 9 in 10 Americans are paying close attention to. That's part of it. It also, I think, probably speaks to some polarization within the Democratic Party because Biden can't be at 33 without a decent amount of Democrats having an unfavorable opinion of him. And so the question is that a thing that corrects itself when the nomination fight is over? So yeah. I think it's something worth watching, too early to say, but it would be a point of concern for me if I was in the Biden campaign for sure.
So the important part of the poll for us was our message testing. We first wanted to answer the question, what's the most effective overall argument about Trump? We've said this a lot of times. There's a million accurately negative things you can say about Trump, but a campaign is about choosing a message, being disciplined, repeating it over and over again. You have to eventually make a choice about what you say about your opponent. You can't say everything. Hillary Clinton ran into this problem in 2016. John Kerry ran into this problem about George Bush in 2004. We called him a million different things. So we tried to test, is it Trump's lying, his racism, his corruption, his policies? What's the most effective argument? Two clear winners emerged. Of all of the frames that we tested. Here's the first one. Here was the most popular frame. Donald Trump's constant tweeting, nasty insults, and petty squabbles with everyone from politicians of both parties to America's allies are preventing us from making any progress. Instead of uniting us to solve big challenges, he's divided us for his own political gain. That was effective among independents, among swing voters, even among some Republicans. But a close runner-up, almost tied, was this message. Donald Trump ran for office as a champion of working people, but as president, he's given tax breaks to big corporations, supported trade agreements that help big businesses, and proposed cuts to health care and retirement benefits. That was also very, very popular with independents and swing voters. That one was a little less popular with Democrats, and I'm guessing it's because Democrats probably didn't agree with that first line that he ran for office as a champion of working people.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. It was both of these, for context. The first one moved the race 12 points. And sorry, let me say that again. The first one made 12%. Scratch that. The math is fucked up in my head. Both of these did very well overall, and with independents. The one about Trump as a faux populist did a few points better with independents.
Yes, it did. It did. And Republicans, which is interesting too.
Yeah.
So the next series of messages we tested were more specific statements about Trump's record and policies on immigration, abortion, healthcare, judges.
Can I say? I'm sorry. Can I say one thing about the message frames?
Yeah.
I think just to give people context about why we did this, the most fundamentally basic exercise that any campaign goes through when they get into a race is something called the message box. And the message box is 4 squares on a whiteboard generally, where you put your positive argument for yourself and you put your negative argument for your opponent. And you want to know what your opponent's positive argument of themselves is and their opponent's negative argument for you. The bottom left, the Democrats' best negative argument about Trump is one that we have never been able to figure out, right? To your point. Yeah. Racist, liar, con man, uncouth, unfit. You say all of the things, all of which are true. But if you say all the things, no one thing breaks through. And so you need a clear and consistent story. So this point of this was the beginning of the exercise to figure out what is the best way to describe Trump that is the most impactful with the voters we need. Because if we run through the same exercise where we say all the things again, then we're going to have the same problem we had in 2016, which is you can't ask voters. Voters won't be able to read back to you. Like I remember doing post-election panels in 2016, and I would ask voters I'd ask the attendees what was Donald Trump's message for himself, right, in the context of this message box. So they would say, "Make America Great Again." Mm. I'd ask the question of, I'd say, what was Hillary Clinton's message for herself? And you'd get lots of answers. People would shout out lots of things, but they were nothing consistent. I would ask what Hillary Clinton's negative message about Trump was, and the room would erupt, right? Like racist, unfit, alt-right, liar, et cetera, except misogynist, all true. And you ask them what Trump's negative message about Hillary was, and they would all yell crooked Hillary.
Yeah.
And so that is not necessarily why Trump won, but it certainly contributed to that fact. And we need to be able to have at the end of the 2020 election, when you ask people, what is, Democratic nominees X argument against Trump, you want to be able to read back something specific to you.
Yes. And so after we did that, the next series of messages we tested were more specific statements about Trump's record and policies on immigration, abortion, healthcare, judges, national security, and the economy to see which statements would make voters more or less likely to support him. Once again, as in Wisconsin, we found that statements describing Trump's economic policies were significantly more effective against him than any other statement about his policies or record. And so, you listed the top 4 in the memo that you wrote about this, which, by the way, everyone should go to crooked.com, read Dan's memo about Wisconsin. It's brilliant, just like the Wisconsin memo was. So go check that out. But top 4 messages, most effective against Trump. Trump promised to reduce the deficit, but, he dramatically increased government spending and cut taxes for corporations and the wealthy, and the deficit's expected to grow to $1 trillion this year. So one about how his tax cut increased the deficit. Another one about how his tax cut gave a tax break to companies that ship jobs overseas, and GM and some other companies are already closing plants and moving stuff overseas. Another one, this was the most popular one in Wisconsin, message in Wisconsin. Donald Trump broke a campaign promise by proposing more than $1 trillion in cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, even as he passed a tax cut for the rich. And then Donald Trump promised to repeal NAFTA, but now he's working with Wall Street, major corporations, and the big drug companies to pass a new NAFTA that hurts workers and helps corporations. All messages about Trump favoring the rich over working people with his policies. Dan, what did you think about these results? And tell us a little bit about what you said in your Arizona memo.
So in the memo, I offer 3 recommendations for how Democrats can begin the process of winning Arizona. The first one is, as I mentioned earlier, which is invest now and early, because this is going to be about registering and turning out new voters. That is going to be the path to win. You got to start that process right now. The second was, about the narratives, which is that the best argument about Trump is that he is a chaotic corporatist, right? That he is causing chaos. And I think what was most important about those narratives was that there was a cost to his actions, right? It is not just that he is a crazy tweeter who fights with people. It's that because he is doing that, he's not helping your family. He's not fighting for things. And so in any message about Trump, you got to draw it to a specific outcome for American families. It's like, this is not a question. We're not trying to convince people not to vote for him because he's unpresidential or uncouth. It is his behavior is not bad on its own. It's his bad behavior has an impact on your life.
Yeah, and
we should be better this.
And we should say that even in that first one about his tweeting, I think one of the reasons it works is instead of uniting us to make progress, he has divided us for his own political gain by doing all this crazy tweeting and yelling and insulting and stuff like that. There's a specific mention that that he has impeded our progress as a nation.
And then the third point, which I think is the most important point, I think it's true in Arizona, it was true in Wisconsin, I think it's true nationally, is whoever wins the economic debate is going to win this race. So Trump's economic approval rating in this poll is 50-48. And that comes despite a summer of really bad economic news for Trump.
Yeah.
His trade war, recession fears, huge market gyrations, some below expectations growth numbers. Despite all of that, Trump's economic approval rating is still positive. And he gets positive ratings on nothing. And so that's significant. And we also tested Trump's positive economic message for himself. And so we tested, since Trump became president, we've created millions of jobs and unemployment rates are the lowest they've been in decades. That message was very effective.
Yeah.
Most Trump messages that we have tested, either in Wisconsin or Arizona, don't do anything to move the race. Just they're either they're like slightly less offensive to independents and swing voters. This one made 20% of independents 20% more likely to support Trump, and even cut the Democratic number down into the 60s. And so that is very significant. But as you point out, we have the ammunition let me say it this way. Trump's economic support is a mile wide and an inch deep. And so if we communicate the messages outlined in this poll, the ones we tested, we can take him down. And if he loses his economic support, I think the bottom does fall out with everyone other than the MAGA base. And so for all the discussion of all the other important issues we can and should talk about, guns, civil rights, Trump's racism, that the Democratic candidate has a moral obligation to talk about those things and campaign on those things. But the effort to take Trump's economic approval rating down should begin right now. And there is so much information. Like, the problem is people know the unemployment numbers and they know that Trump says the economy's been good, but they don't know what his actual economic policies are, and they don't know who his economic policies are for. When you find out that he has done these bad things in order to help his friends in big business and enrich himself, then it can be devastating. But that information is not breaking through in the organic press. And so it needs to be part of, I know I'm a fucking broken record on this, but a aggressive, targeted, sustained advertising campaign. And that campaign should have started yesterday.
Well, yes, it should have. When you read this memo, you read this poll and read our Wisconsin poll, you realize why during yesterday's press conference, Nancy Pelosi opened with, instead of impeachment, I'd like to talk about prescription drug prices and our legislation to lower prescription drug prices. And look, we have been very critical. We had been very critical of Pelosi before this impeachment inquiry for not pursuing an impeachment inquiry. But I would say that Pelosi's reluctance to pursue impeachment makes a little more sense when you read polls like this. Now at least you know what polls she's been looking at, because these polls all say like the best way to beat Trump, the most effective way to beat Trump is to talk about these economic issues, to talk about his faux populism, his plutocracy, his helping his rich friends over working people, his budget cuts, his healthcare cuts, his Social Security cuts, his Medicare cuts. Like, this is what Democrats need to be talking about in this election in order to beat him. And, now, my argument would be that I think that we can do both, that like there is both a moral obligation and a political benefit to impeaching him, and we should do it. And we've argued that, and we're in it now. But I think if all we talked about from now until the election is Trump's crimes and his criminality and everything he deserves to be impeached for and his racist outbursts and his tirades and all that kind of stuff, and we didn't talk about all of the policies that he's passed that are making life harder for most people in this country of all races, of all genders, of all backgrounds, then we would, we're not putting our best argument forward. And so I understand, and everyone should understand, like, this is, like you said, this is our ultimate goal. We do need to communicate to voters exactly what Trump's policies are and what they have done to the country, especially on the economy.
And the last point I'd make on that is, I think it's great that Nancy Pelosi started a press conference that way, but Trump is spending millions of dollars on digital ads to take this message directly to the voters. And we are not going to communicate the economic narrative that we need through the press. We have to communicate directly to people.
Yeah, that is
an
old theory that we can communicate it through the press.
And we know this because all of this information that we show to voters has all been covered by the press. It's not that they ignored the stories. They wrote stories about the $1 trillion deficit. They wrote stories about the tax plan, but it doesn't break through the noise. People's information are like, the mistake we make in Democratic politics is we worry about the coverage and not the conversation. If you can, it's not that you can't just add up the number of headlines you got and news hits you got and think that equals communication.
Right.
It is it showing up in people's social media feed? Are they seeing it, or are they seeing it relentlessly? And there just is no strategy or no possibility to use the organic earned media to do that. So you're going to have to spend money to do it. And it can happen at the exact same time that we're impeaching Trump. It can happen at the exact same time we're talking about how Trump's policies on guns have contributed to all these other things. But it has to be happening.
Yep. All right. When we come back, we will have Dan's interview with Congressman Jamie Raskin, and then we will have my interview with Abdul El Sayed.